Welcome everybody, I'm Sega Lord X, and in this episode we're going to be taking a look at more Sega Saturn shoot 'em ups. Now, back at the beginning of the year I did a Sega Saturn shooter video, but I missed a ton of games, and I mean a ton of games. So I went back, I looked at what I didn't cover, what I haven't covered in other videos, and decided to just pull them all into one big episode. We're going to be looking at 27 Sega Saturn shoot 'em ups in this video. So, that's a lot of time we're going to be going over. Let's get started. Dropped in late 1998 by Success, Cotton Boomerang would make its home debut for the Sega Saturn. If you recall my glowing praise for Cotton 2 on the Saturn, you're going to hear more of the same here. I freaking love this series, and this remix of Cotton 2 is every bit as fun and awesome as the game that came before it. Again, awesome graphics and art presentation fill your screen with impossibly good looking sprites, backgrounds, special effects, and bosses. Scaling and rotation is everywhere, enemies fill the screen, and transparencies burst forth with ease. This is the kind of stuff the Saturn was built to do, and few games do it as well as Cotton Boomerang. As with all things great and rare, you're gonna pay out the arse for a copy of this gem. But in a rare show of support for a crazy expensive game, this one is worth every damn penny. It's a collector's showpiece, a 2D tour de force of Saturn power, and a game you'll cherish from the moment you take possession of it. Bokan to Ippatsu is a vertical scrolling shooter published by Grandprix in late 1997. This classically contradictory game has you actually playing the villain for once, fighting against the heroes from the Time Bokan series. You and your gang choose one of 6 mecha and begin your campaign of revenge. Hyper cute graphics, art design, and music round out a fun presentation and a solid playing game. This one tops out close to $100, and even though I enjoyed the game, I can't say I'd want to spend that on it at today's prices. If you have interest and the means, the game is far cheaper on the PlayStation 1. In mid-1996, Taito would release Darius II on the Sega Saturn. This one is often overlooked due to the quality of Darius Gaiden. That game looks, plays, and sounds better than this entry, and if you're in the market for only one Darius game, that's the one you want. Don't let that stop you from giving Darius II a spin, however. It's a solid shooter that stands on its own, and it isn't overly expensive either. It's also the best home version of this game available, easily surpassing the 8 and 16-bit ports before it. Darius II may not be the game Gaiden was, but it's still a worthy shooter that plays great. Detana Twinbee Yahoo Deluxe Pack was released by Konami in late 1995. This compilation contains the arcade shooters Detana Twinbee and Twinbee Yahoo. In many ways, these games are vertical shooters very much in the vein of Parodius, with ultra cutesy graphics and music. Everything is over the top cartoon colorful with enemies that almost always fall on the silly side. I'm not a biggest fan of the Twinbee games as I am the Parodius games, however, as I never thought they played particularly well. I dislike the power-up system, and really dislike the melee aspects of the gameplay. This one is super cheap though, so it's worth adding to your collection if you're curious. Dazaemon 2 isn't really a game, but is a collection of tools that allows you to build your own 2D or 3D shooter. There are 3 example shooters on the disc to give you an idea of what you can accomplish. Buried under a mountain of menus, this is for the hardcore only. If you ever have a moment, Check out the Dazaemon database on the videos here on YouTube. There's been a ton of games created for it, and quite a bit of it has been fun to watch. Because of the creator aspect to the content, many Saturn owners have zero interest in this disc, and it sells for next to nothing regularly. If you can get it cheap, I say pick it up. It's a unique piece of software not everyone knows about. Gekirindan, released by Virgin Interactive in early 1997, is a vertically scrolling shooter which features a time travel centric story, where you chase the enemy across various time periods doing battle with ships from that era. This game reminds me of tower plan shooters like Truxton, with various similarities in bomb attacks and power-ups. Where this game really shines is in its freaking awesome soundtrack. It adds incredible depth to the gameplay by pushing you on through the game just to hear the next piece. Seriously, this game is worthy enough to rip to your phone and listen to it on the way to work. It's really that good. Gekirindan is expensive, however, easily breaking the $100 barrier, so you're gonna want to try it before you buy. If you're a big fan of awesome game music in your shooters though, I can't imagine you won't adore it as much as I did. Part of the Arcade Gear series of releases, Gun Frontier was released on the Saturn by Xing in late 1997. This vertical shooter is a port of the original Taito release from 1990, so the graphics lack much of the flair typically seen in shooters at the time. This is easily overlooked, however, as the game has a great presentation otherwise. I especially dig its soundtrack, which ranges from emotional lows to upbeat and exciting highs. Gameplay can be frustrating due to the way the game pulls you back after each death, but that drives you to do better and push harder. Gun Frontier is a pricey game, so I advise again to try it before you commit the crazy funds. MAME again is your friend here, so check it out there to see if it's for you. Another Arcade Gears release, Image Fight and X Multiply, would hit the Saturn, courtesy of Xing in late 1998. This dual pack of shooters is based on the original arcade releases done by Irem. I was never a fan of Image Fight. I find the game to be difficult as hell due to its overly fast movement speed. I recognize various qualities about the game that make me want to try it, but I get frustrated extremely quickly. On the other hand, I adore X Multiply. Its cool power-ups, better graphics presentation, and more polished soundtrack definitely keep me hooked longer. Don't get me wrong, X Multiply can be hard as well, but I just prefer its brand of shooting more. Like many of these games, this one is expensive, so be sure to visit MAME and try them out before you jump in. In late 1995, Irem would port its arcade submarine shooter In the Hunt to Sega's 2D powerhouse. Curiously, the port would not be as solid as many would have hoped, with regular bouts of slowdown occurring during gameplay. Don't let that scare you away, however, as In the Hunt on the Saturn is still a great looking game that still plays strong a good portion of the game. Slowdown does rear its ugly head in inopportune times, especially during boss fights, making the game harder to enjoy than its arcade and PS1 peers. The Saturn retains all of the animation from the arcade, and it's a beautiful sight to behold despite its shortcomings. If the art style looks familiar here, it's because many on the team that created this game would go on to create Metal Slug for the Neo Geo. I own the Japanese release, and I give it a thumbs up if you can get it for around $50 or so. In mid-1996, the 18-developed Kingdom Grandprix would drop on the Sega Saturn. Featuring a unique gameplay hook of racing other ships through a playfield to the finish line, this is a great looking and sounding vertical shooter. If the racing aspect doesn't do anything for you, you can also play a non-competitive mode where you can focus on just the shooter portion of the gameplay. Kingdom Grandprix has gotten pretty expensive in recent years, going for close to $100 complete. Because of the style of game this is, I highly recommend you play it before you commit. It's a good game, but the racing aspect can be frustrating to say the least. KyuKyoku Tiger 2 Plus was published by Naxat in late 1997. This entry into the Twin Cobra series of games would have Saturn exclusive features and an entirely new stage. I've always found these games to be rather simple and straightforward, but you can't deny that they play extremely well. Solid graphics and sound round out a package of fast-paced shooting, great boss battles, and varied power-ups. You're going to spend a fortune to get this one, so be sure to try it out first. The original arcade game is available on MAME to get an idea of its quality. Taito would bring its classic arcade game Metal Black to the Saturn in mid-1996. This horizontal shooter would introduce a beam system, which would have you power up your main attack by collecting small power-ups. Once fully charged, you could unleash a massive attack that could deal heavy damage. Boss fighters could do this as well, unleashing a powerful attack of their own. Graphics and sound are below what you'll normally see and hear on the Saturn, thanks to the arcade game being a bit older on which it's based. That doesn't hurt Metal Black's overall fun factor though, and I really enjoyed this game the more I played it. It runs expensive these days, so use MAME to check it out and see if it's what you want. Planet Joker was released by Naxat in early 1997 for the Saturn. This game is often at the top of worst shooter lists for the Saturn, and I can honestly say it deserves to be in that conversation for sure. There's very little here to be excited about. Level and enemy design lack any personality at all, and the overall production value is hurt by poor sound effects and visual anomalies. The one area this game does hold some quality is in its soundtrack. Not every track is a hit, but there are some bona fide good tunes here at times. I do not know if that makes the game worth its $40 or $50 price point to you, but there are far better games on the Saturn that you can get for that kind of money. Late 1996 would bring us Sengoku Blade, published by Atlus. This horizontal shooter would bring simple, yet extremely well implemented gameplay together with a great soundtrack and beautiful art design. This is a direct sequel to Saikyo's Sengoku Ace, a vertically scrolling shooter released a few years prior. Choose one of multiple heroes to begin your journey into an alternate history of feudal Japan, blasting ninjas, robots, and all sorts of mechanized animals. Again, art design stands out here, and the atmosphere and setting is top notch. You're gonna pay over $100 typically for this gem, so if you have the means to try before you buy, do so. I think most hardcore shooter fans will find it a great game worth picking up. In mid-1998, Atlus would publish the Saikyo joint, Soul Divide. This story-heavy shooter is a game I so very much want to be good at. I want to see more of it. I think the shooter and melee aspects are pretty unique and cool. However, this is the rare case of a game I'm just awful at. I can't find any rhythm or strategy to employ that allows me to see any kind of success within the game. That makes part of me want to tell you to skip this irritating game, but I can't. Soul Divide isn't the best looking or sounding shooter on the Saturn, but I can tell you that its unique gameplay hooks make it a game worth playing. It's not overly expensive at the moment either. Give it a shot if you want something truly different. In mid-1996, MediaQuest would release Sonic Wings Special for the Sega Saturn. This vertical scrolling shooter is packed with tons of characters and uses a branching path system that requires multiple plays to see every stage. Graphical presentation is solid, with lots of little details and little to no slowdown to speak of. The music is rather tame and lacks any real emotional punch, making the stages feel boring and uninspired. Sonic Wings Special isn't a bad game at all. It just isn't as good as some of the other games in this episode. It's on the cheaper side of those games, so if you're a fan of the series, give it a look. In late 1996, Taito would launch Space Invaders on the Saturn. I picked this game up thinking it's a 90s remix of an old shooter, and boy was I wrong. This is classic Space Invaders, circa late 1970s in all of its simple glory. You know the drill. Aliens are here to blast you dead, and you must kill every last one of them to survive. Featuring various classic overlays for the playfield, this simple shooter is dirt cheap and an easy pickup for your collection. Steam Hearts was released only in Japan in late 1998 by TGL. This port of the extremely erotic PC-98 shooter would be heavily censored on the Saturn, basically leaving only the shooter itself to keep your interest. Luckily, Steam Hearts has the chops to do just that, and is a great vertical shooter with a fun and upbeat soundtrack and solid graphics. The story here is classic Japanese craziness, with our hero needing to screw each female boss after he defeats her in order to eradicate the virus within them. That's right, Saturn fans, your semen is the antidote to what ails the world, the dream of every young boy since the dawn of time. Those looking for the explicit cinemas from the original release will be let down, but all else who apply should find a solid, fun, and somewhat crazy addition to your shooter library. Strikers 1945 was released in 1996 by Atlus. This alternate timeline shooter has pilots from various nations rising up to stop a power-hungry terrorist organization from taking over the world. This somewhat plain vertical scrolling shooter isn't overly flashy or hard, but still plays great for fans of the genre. Graphics are subdued but well presented, as is the by the numbers soundtrack. Nothing here will knock your socks off, but Strikers 1945 is an affordable and solid entry into the library. Strikers 1945-2 was dropped a few years after the first game, in 1998. A Splinter Cell from the first game has acquired new mecha technology that it intends to terrorize the world with, and our band of heroes from the first game are called into action yet again. Take everything I said about the first Strikers 1945 game and copy and paste it here. Again, it's not overly flashy or inventive, but the presentation is solid and the gameplay well designed. Unlike the first game, however, Strikers 1945-2 is rather pricey, doubling the original's asking price. I can't say I'd pay that, but if you're a fan of the first, this one might just be what you're looking for. Based on the early 80s anime movie, Super Dimension Fortress Macross would land on the Sega Saturn, published by Bandai in mid-1997. This story-heavy shooter has long cinemas from the film, conversations that pop up during battles, and all new music and content created just for this release. Gameplay is traditional side-scrolling shooting, with the ability to transform your Valkyrie into 3 modes for various offensive and defensive maneuvers. This game isn't the deepest shooter out there, nor is the gameplay in the upper echelon of the genre, especially on a machine like the Saturn. That said, there is a certain draw to this if you were an 80s kid and had any interest in Macross at all. The cinemas are great, and the gameplay is easy enough to follow. It's cheap too, so give it a look if the source material means anything to you at all. Late 1997 would bring Saturn fans Terra Cresta 3D from Neon Bussin'. I want to be clear right up front, I dislike this game quite a bit. This sequel to the classic 80s shooter Terra Cresta lacks excitement in every category. It looks drab, the music lacks any punch, the gameplay is boring and slow, the power-up system brings little in the way of any help at all. Making all those problems glaringly worse is the game's ridiculous price. Approaching $100, you can buy a number of awesome Japanese Saturn games with that money, including shooters that take a giant piss all over this game. If you find this game fun, I'll not argue your preference, but for me, this overpriced and underwhelming game deserves none of my time, and is nowhere near worth what it goes for on eBay. Xing would drop the classic Data East shooter Fang on the Saturn in early 1997. This shoot 'em up has you piloting a mech, running and jumping through frantic levels of ground and aerial assaults. You could damn near call this game a run and gun, but the auto-scrolling screen and the feel of the onslaught of enemies definitely make it a shoot 'em up to me. Despite the original arcade being released in 1991, this game holds up graphically extremely well, with great color, large sprites, and great animation. The solid soundtrack and great challenge round out a total package of classic gaming. Again, it's priced in collector territory, so you'll want to pull this one up on MAME to see if it's your cup of tea. Konami would bring multiple Parodius games to the Saturn, and we'll start here with Parodius Deluxe Pack, released in mid-1995. This compilation contains the first 2 arcade Parodius games, each one a parody of Konami's own Gradius series. These games look and play great. I love the colorful graphics, and the soundtracks are classic Konami goodness. If you've played a Gradius game, you know what to expect here. Just add a ton of playful imagery and music, and you have Parodius in a nutshell. The second game we'll look at is Parodius Forever With Me, released in late 1996. This game has the weird distinction of having a commentator belting out lines while you play. I have no clue what the hell the dude is saying, but he gets into it at times like he's giving you advice, or scalding you for poor play. The game itself is tried and true Parodius, with great colorful graphics and a particularly good soundtrack. It's one of my favorite games in the series, even with the commentator I can't understand. Also dropped in late 1996 was Sexy Parodius. Again, continuing the tradition of ultra colorful graphics, great animation, and outstanding music. This game would mark the final shooter entry into the Parodius series. This is often cited as the best in the series as well, but I found Forever With Me an overall more enjoyable game. I don't think you can go wrong with any of these games honestly, and none of them are prohibitively expensive. Some of you will be turned off by the art style, and I can understand that, but don't look past these fun and easy to get into shooters otherwise. Our last game for this episode likely doesn't belong in this company, but we'll look at Purikura Daisakusen anyway. Released by Atlus in late 1996, this Titan arcade port is as strange as they come on the Saturn. It's part isometric shooter, part isometric action game, mixed together with tons of challenging enemies, bosses, and magic. I would be late to the party for this one, not playing it until many years after its release. It took me a while to warm to it, but there's a good game here. Its unique presentation and gameplay is bolstered by a solid challenge and fitting musical score. It's one of those games that you'll play just to see the next stage. As with many of the others in this episode, it's expensive, so you may want to try it out before you drop the funds on it. Luckily, it's playable on MAME, so be sure to check it out there first. So there we go, folks, 27 Sega Saturn shoot 'em ups. Now, outside of me butchering some of those Japanese names, I know what most of you are thinking. You're thinking that those games are really expensive. And you'd be right. If you went on eBay tonight and checked the prices of most of those games, most of them are going to cost around $100 or more. There's a couple of gems in there that you can get cheaper, but most of them are fairly expensive. Now, the good news is, like I said in the video, MAME is definitely your friend. Most of these games were arcade versions. The Saturn was ports of the arcade versions. So if you play the game on MAME, it should give you a great idea of whether or not you'll like the final product that was released on the Saturn. So, Sega Saturn shoot 'em ups. Which one are your favorites? Which ones did you hate? Which ones haven't you played? Hit me down in the comments section and let's talk about it. I'm Sega Lord X. As always, I really appreciate you guys watching. I'll catch you next time.